What?
Away from me! Get away from me!
Get away
Forever!
from me!
Forever!
After Jenny files a police report, Sumit is detained and questioned over a secret $1.2 million deal, placing him right at the center of an investigation. Sumit insists Jenny completely misunderstood the documents, while his parents are demanding to know why she took a private family problem to the police. But investigators are not only following the money, they're digging into the deal's hidden timeline and tracing the other people connected to it. So, what did Jenny actually discover? Why did Sumit keep such a massive deal from her? What are his parents saying behind closed doors? And most importantly, what did police uncover that made them dig deeper instead of simply closing the case? But none of this started at the police station, and it did not start with Jenny accusing Sumit of secretly having more than $1 million. It started with one financial reference she was never expecting to see, followed by an explanation from Sumit that somehow made her even more uncomfortable. Jenny had noticed that Sumit seemed increasingly distracted whenever money came up, although at first she had no reason to believe anything serious was happening. He would mention business opportunities in passing, talk about wanting more security for their future, and occasionally disappear into long phone conversations that he described as nothing important. Jenny did not immediately assume he was hiding something because she understood that Sumit had his own responsibilities, relationships, and plans outside their marriage. What bothered her was how quickly the subject seemed to disappear whenever she asked a direct question. There had been several conversations where Jenny tried to understand what Sumit was planning financially, particularly because they had been discussing stability and what the next few years of their life might actually look like. Sumit usually told her there was nothing concrete enough to discuss, and Jenny accepted that answer because she did not want to turn every unfinished idea into an argument. Then she came across something that did not sound unfinished at all. The document contained Sumit's name beside references to a business arrangement, outside participants, projected returns, and a figure that immediately stopped her cold. Jenny read it once, then again, because she genuinely believed she must have misunderstood the number. The figure connected to the proposal was roughly $1.2 million, and suddenly every vague conversation Sumit had been having looked completely different. Jenny's first question was not, "Where is the money?" Her first question was much simpler and probably much more dangerous for their marriage. She wanted to know why she had never heard about this deal. Even if the number represented potential value rather than actual cash, a proposal involving that amount was not the kind of thing she expected to discover accidentally. She began thinking back to moments when Sumit had told her they needed to be careful financially, and she started wondering how someone could be discussing an opportunity worth 7 figures while simultaneously acting as though nothing major was happening. That contradiction did not prove wrongdoing, but it created exactly the kind of doubt that grows faster every time another detail appears. When Jenny finally confronted Sumit, he did not look confused about what she was talking about, and that was the first thing that made her suspicious. He immediately told her that she had misunderstood the documents and that the $1.2 million figure was not money sitting in an account somewhere. According to Sumit, the number represented the possible future value of a larger business arrangement involving multiple people, projected growth, outside investment, and several conditions that had not yet been completed. In other words, he was saying Jenny had seen the biggest number on the page without understanding what it actually represented. Jenny was willing to consider that explanation, but then she asked the question Sumit seemed least prepared for. If the deal was legitimate, complicated, and potentially beneficial, why had he never mentioned that it existed? Sumit said there was no point discussing something that might never happen, and he argued that bringing unfinished business plans into their home would only create unnecessary expectations. Jenny immediately pushed back because that explanation might have worked for an idea discussed once over coffee, but it sounded very different when paperwork, outside participants, and large projected numbers were already involved. She was not asking Sumit why he had failed to promise her $1 million. She was asking why he had apparently decided that she did not need to know he was involved in something that could potentially reshape their financial future. The more Sumit tried to reduce the importance of the deal, the more Jenny wondered why so much effort had apparently gone into keeping it separate from her. Then came the first real problem with the timeline. Sumit suggested that the discussions had only recently become serious, but Jenny noticed dates on the paperwork suggesting that conversations may have started much earlier. She asked him when he first heard about the opportunity, and Sumit explained that hearing about an idea was different from formally joining it. Jenny asked when he first spoke to the people involved, and Sumit said casual conversations should not be treated like negotiations. Then she asked when his name first appeared in written material, and suddenly the distinction became even more complicated. Every answer sounded technically possible, yet Jenny felt as if she had to keep narrowing the question until Sumit gave her the exact piece of information she was asking for. That pattern is what pushed the argument beyond money. Jenny started feeling that Sumit was not necessarily lying outright, but that he was giving her the smallest version of the truth each time she asked a question. Sumit saw it completely differently. He believed Jenny was looking at disconnected pieces of an unfinished business process and treating every difference in wording like evidence that he had been dishonest. He kept saying she did not understand how the arrangement developed, while Jenny kept saying that she could not understand something he had deliberately kept from her. Neither of them was really arguing about the $1.2 million anymore. They were arguing about whether withholding information until your partner discovers it counts as protecting them or deceiving them. Then Jenny noticed a name she did not recognize attached to one part of the proposal. She asked Sumit who the person was, and he explained that this individual had helped introduce him to the opportunity and had connections to people interested in expanding the business. Jenny wanted to know how long Sumit had known this person and why she had never heard the name before. Sumit said the relationship was professional and not important to their personal life, but Jenny immediately asked how someone could be unimportant if they were involved in a business arrangement carrying a potential seven-figure valuation. Sumit became frustrated because he felt Jenny was turning every ordinary business connection into something suspicious, while Jenny felt his frustration was another attempt to make her stop asking questions. At that point, Jenny asked whether any money had already changed hands. Sumit told her that the proposal involved preliminary expenses, possible commitments, and future obligations, but he strongly denied secretly receiving anything close to $1.2 million. Jenny then asked whether he had personally transferred money, signed anything, promised money, or agreed to future payments. Sumit explained that certain discussions had progressed far enough to include commitments, but he insisted those commitments were connected to the business structure rather than their household finances. That answer created another immediate problem because Jenny wanted to know who decided where Sumit's business finances ended and their shared future began. If one person accepted financial obligations large enough to create risk, Jenny believed the other spouse deserved to know before the paperwork was signed. Sumit insisted Jenny was imagining exposure that did not exist, and he repeatedly told her that her name was not secretly attached to $1 million debt. That should have reassured her, but Jenny was now listening carefully to every word. She asked whether anything connected to her, including their shared address, household information, or financial records, had been used anywhere in the process. Sumit said she was turning the situation into something far more dramatic than it really was. Jenny asked him to answer yes or no, and once again, Sumit responded with context rather than the direct answer she wanted. That was the moment Jenny decided she needed someone outside the marriage to look at what she had found. Before she did anything, Jenny apparently tried one more time to get a complete explanation. She told Sumit she wanted to see everything connected to the proposal, not selected pages, not verbal summaries, and not another explanation of why the number looked worse than it really was. Sumit resisted because he said some of the material involved other people's private information and negotiations that were not his to share freely. From Sumit's point of view, that was a perfectly reasonable boundary. From Jenny's point of view, it sounded like the same answer she had been hearing from the beginning. There was always another reason. She could not see the full picture. This is when Sumit's parents enter the situation, because Sumit tells them that Jenny has become convinced he is hiding something financially. His parents initially assume the couple are dealing with another private disagreement and expect Sumit to explain it himself. Then they hear the number. Once $1.2 million enters the conversation, even they want to understand what Sumit has been involved in. His mother reportedly asks him directly whether he has signed anything that could create trouble, while his father focuses more on why Jenny discovered the arrangement accidentally. Sumit tells them the number is being misunderstood, and insists everyone is reacting to a projected valuation as though somebody handed him a suitcase full of money. His parents are not immediately convinced that Jenny is right, but they are also not completely satisfied with Sumit's explanation. His father wants to know why an opportunity that was apparently insignificant enough to keep quiet had still generated paperwork, meetings, and outside commitments. Sumit says those things developed gradually and that he planned to tell Jenny once the situation became concrete. His mother asks exactly when that would have been, and Sumit does not give a specific answer. That tiny moment matters because for the first time, Jenny is not the only person asking whether Sumit waited too long to disclose something important. However, the moment Jenny mentions the possibility of contacting authorities, Sumit's parents become much more defensive. They believe the dispute should remain within the family unless Jenny has actual evidence that something illegal happened. From their perspective, financial confusion and marital secrecy are serious problems, but bringing police into the situation could create consequences far beyond the original disagreement. Sumit's mother cannot understand why Jenny would take that step before giving Sumit more time to explain himself. His father is calmer, but he also warns that once authorities become involved, neither Jenny nor Sumit will control where the questions lead. Jenny understands that risk, which is why she initially frames her concern carefully. She does not claim she knows Sumit committed a crime, because she does not know that. She explains that she discovered financial documents connected to a substantial arrangement, that she cannot determine what obligations were created, and that the information she received from Sumit did not resolve her concerns. What she wants is clarity about whether anything associated with her or their shared financial life has been connected to commitments she never proved. Jenny expects she may simply be told this is a private financial dispute, but the response is not that simple. Investigators begin asking basic questions about the documents, including who created them, who signed them, when the discussions began, and whether the projected value was being represented consistently to everyone involved. Jenny is asked what Sumit told her and whether she has access to the complete records. She admits that she does not. That might have ended the matter immediately if the documents had looked completely ordinary, but something about the timeline apparently creates enough uncertainty that investigators want to speak with Sumit directly. Jenny suddenly realizes this has moved beyond her original goal. She wanted someone to tell her whether she was overreacting. Instead, Sumit is now being asked to explain the arrangement himself. When Sumit learns Jenny actually filed the report, his reaction is immediate. He cannot believe she turned a marriage dispute into a police matter before fully understanding what she had discovered. He tells her that the people involved in the deal could lose trust in him simply because authorities are now asking questions, even if nothing improper happened. Jenny responds that he had multiple opportunities to give her enough information to prevent this escalation. Sumit says he gave her the explanation, but Jenny says he gave her pieces of it. That distinction becomes the center of everything that follows. Sumit's parents are furious when they hear he has been called in for questioning. His mother directs most of her anger toward Jenny because she believes Jenny should have come to them before taking such an extreme step. She asks how Jenny could say she loves Sumit while creating a situation that could damage his reputation before anyone has established that he actually did anything wrong. Jenny refuses to accept all the blame. She reminds them that she never created the documents, never created the secret, and never forced Sumit to keep the arrangement away from her. She says if Sumit had simply told her what he was doing when the deal became serious, there would have been nothing mysterious enough to report. Sumit's father is less emotional but asks a much more uncomfortable question. He turns to Sumit and asks whether Jenny's report would have happened if Sumit had told her about the arrangement earlier. Sumit says that is impossible to know because Jenny may still have misunderstood the number. His father responds that misunderstanding a disclosed business proposal is very different from accidentally discovering one your spouse never mentioned. That is the first moment Sumit realizes even his parents are not going to defend every decision he made. Then Sumit is detained for questioning while investigators try to establish exactly what the 1.2 million figure represents. This is the moment Jenny thought she wanted when she demanded outside answers, but watching it happen feels completely different. She begins worrying that anger pushed the situation too far, because there is a huge emotional difference between saying, "Someone needs to look into this," and seeing your husband disappear into a room where strangers are deciding whether his explanation makes sense. Jenny does not suddenly believe she was wrong to ask questions, but she starts wondering whether she understood how serious the consequences could become. Inside the questioning, Sumit repeats the same explanation he gave Jenny. The 1.2 million figure, he says, is not personal cash, hidden income, or money deposited into some secret account. It represents the potential overall value of a proposed venture if several future stages succeed. The number includes projections, outside investment, expansion estimates, and participation from more than one person. If those conditions never happen, the deal could ultimately be worth far less. Investigators do not immediately challenge that explanation because projected valuations are not unusual by themselves. What interests them is something else entirely. They want to understand why different documents appear to describe Sumit's involvement at different points in time. One record suggests he was participating in discussions earlier than Jenny believed. Another seems to show his role expanding later. Sumit explains that his involvement changed gradually, which is why the dates look inconsistent when viewed without context. He says there was never one clean moment when he suddenly became part of $1 million arrangement. There were introductions, informal discussions, planning sessions, preliminary documents, and then more serious negotiations. That explanation may be legitimate, but investigators now want to know whether everyone involved understood the same progression. That is why the matter remains open rather than being closed after one conversation. Sumit is now under investigation while authorities examine the timeline, communications, and financial connections associated with the proposal. That does not mean he has been proven guilty of anything, but it does mean his explanation alone was not enough to end every question. Jenny hears that and immediately feels two completely opposite emotions. Part of her feels validated because she was told repeatedly that she was making too much out of nothing. Another part of her is terrified because she never actually wanted investigators to find something serious. Sumit's parents react strongly when they hear the investigation is continuing. His mother believes the entire situation has become unnecessarily destructive and says Jenny should have trusted Sumit enough to resolve the matter privately. She worries that even an investigation ending with no wrongdoing could still damage how people see her son. His father, however, focuses on something more practical. If the business arrangement is legitimate, he wants Sumit to produce every document necessary to demonstrate that clearly. He tells Sumit that anger at Jenny will not answer the investigators' questions, and that the fastest way out is complete transparency. That advice creates an uncomfortable moment because complete transparency is exactly what Jenny had been asking for from the beginning. Sumit knows it, Jenny knows it, and even his parents now seem to recognize it. The difference is that Sumit says he could not simply hand over other people's private business information to Jenny, whereas investigators have the authority to ask for records through proper channels. Jenny accepts that distinction, but she still believes he could have explained far more than he did without revealing confidential details. The next development makes the case much more interesting because investigators identify a second financial connection associated with the deal. At first, Jenny thinks this must be the hidden piece that proves the arrangement was much bigger than Sumit admitted. The connection appears tied to another prospective participant whose resources were necessary for the project to reach the larger valuation. That means Sumit was never the only person connected to the money, and the 1.2 million amount may actually represent the combined potential of several contributors. For Sumit, this discovery feels like the beginning of vindication. He had been saying from the start that Jenny saw one enormous number and assumed it belonged to him personally. Now investigators are seeing that multiple parties were involved. Sumit tells his parents this proves Jenny should have waited before calling police. His mother agrees immediately and becomes even more upset with Jenny, arguing that her son has been dragged into an investigation because she reacted to paperwork she did not understand. His father is more cautious because he recognizes that the second connection answers one question while opening another. If several people were involved, there should be even more documentation showing exactly how responsibilities were divided. Jenny also starts questioning her original interpretation. She admits that when she first saw the 1.2 million figure, she imagined something far more direct than a projected business valuation. She pictured money moving somewhere without her knowledge, and that fear influenced how she read everything that followed. However, she's not ready to say Sumit did nothing wrong within their marriage. The deal becoming less suspicious financially does not make the secrecy disappear. If anything, the presence of multiple partners confirms that the opportunity had developed beyond a random idea. Then investigators review communications, showing Sumit asking cautious questions about risk, obligations, and whether certain projections were realistic. That information works strongly in his favor because it does not look like someone blindly rushing into a scheme or secretly celebrating guaranteed money. It looks like someone evaluating an uncertain business proposal and trying to understand how much risk he would personally carry. Jenny hears about those messages and her confidence begins shifting again. She now has to consider that Sumit may have been telling the truth about the nature of the deal even while handling the marriage side of it terribly. This is where the story could have ended with Jenny apologizing, but another communication keeps the tension alive. Investigators find evidence suggesting Sumit knew the potential scale of the opportunity earlier than he originally implied during his confrontation with Jenny. A large projected number was apparently being discussed before Sumit claimed the deal became serious. When asked about that contradiction, Sumit explains that early projections were speculative and changed constantly, so he never considered them meaningful enough to discuss at home. He says hearing someone throw out a large future number is not the same as believing a deal is actually worth that amount. Technically, Sumit may be right, but emotionally Jenny is furious again because the pattern has repeated. She discovers something, Sumit gives an explanation, new information appears, and then Sumit gives more context explaining why the new information still fits a story. Jenny tells him she is exhausted from learning the truth in reverse. She wants him to understand how impossible trust becomes when every answer arrives only after another document forces the question. Sumit responds that Jenny is treating complexity like deception. He says business negotiations evolve, numbers change, people enter and leave, and no single document tells the complete story. Jenny agrees that business can be complicated, but marriage should not require an investigation to understand what your partner has been doing. That line hits Sumit harder because he knows there is truth in it. Even if every financial question is ultimately explained, Jenny should not have needed investigators to learn the basic shape of an opportunity he hoped might affect their future. His parents start shifting slightly as more details come out. Sumit's mother still believes Jenny went far too far by contacting police, but she also begins asking why Sumit did not simply tell Jenny that he was discussing a potentially significant business opportunity. Sumit repeats that he wanted to wait until it was real. His mother asks what real means when meetings, projections, and written proposals already exist. For perhaps the first time, Sumit has to defend the secrecy without relying on the claim that Jenny misunderstood the money. His father is even more direct. He tells Sumit that if he expected Jenny to eventually benefit from the opportunity, then she should at least have known that the opportunity existed. He also tells Jenny that involving police before she possessed complete information was an extraordinary escalation. The parents now see failures on both sides, which makes the conflict much harder, because nobody gets the simple validation they wanted. Jenny begins feeling guilty when she sees how deeply the investigation is affecting Sumit. Business contacts are asking questions, people are becoming cautious around him, and he feels as if his name is being attached to something suspicious before anyone has proven that the deal itself was improper. Jenny never intended to destroy an opportunity or embarrass him publicly. She wanted an independent explanation. However, she also knows she cannot pretend the report came purely from calm financial concern. She was hurt, angry, and frightened when she made the call, and those emotions absolutely influenced how quickly she escalated things. Sumit eventually tells Jenny that the hardest part is not being questioned by investigators. The hardest part is knowing she believed he might be capable of secretly building $1 million future behind her back. Jenny responds that she did not begin by believing that. She began by asking questions, and every missing answer made the worst possibility feel more believable. Sumit says she should have trusted his explanation. Jenny says trust is not a command you can give someone after hiding the information that created the suspicion. Their argument becomes quieter at this stage, which actually makes it more intense. Neither of them is screaming because they are finally talking about the real problem. Sumit admits he liked the idea of surprising Jenny if the opportunity succeeded. He imagined being able to tell her that he had helped create something valuable instead of forcing her to worry through months of uncertainty. Jenny tells him that a surprise vacation and a secret financial commitment are not the same thing. She would rather worry with him than discover afterward that he decided alone what she was strong enough to know. The police investigation, meanwhile, continues tracing the outside participants, and this is where the structure of the deal finally becomes much clearer. The 1.2 million figure appears to represent a best-case projected valuation if the venture reached several future targets. It includes expected expansion, outside capital, projected earnings, and the combined participation of multiple people. Sumit's own stake is only one portion of the entire structure. In practical terms, there is no evidence at this stage that Sumit secretly received 1.2 million, controlled 1.2 million, or had a hidden account containing anything close to that amount. That is the biggest financial twist of the story, because Jenny's original nightmare is beginning to collapse. She did discover something substantial, but the number meant something very different from what she feared. Sumit immediately feels relieved, because this supports the explanation he gave from the beginning. His parents feel vindicated too, particularly his mother, who says Jenny's decision to involve police now looks even more extreme. But before anyone can declare Sumit completely cleared, investigators make it clear that understanding the valuation does not automatically close every question surrounding how the deal was represented and documented. That distinction keeps Sumit under investigation. Authorities still want to verify whether the participants understood the terms consistently and whether any preliminary obligations were handled correctly. Again, that does not establish wrongdoing, but it prevents the story from ending with one easy explanation. Jenny now realizes she may have been wrong about the meaning of the 1.2 million, while still being right that something important was hidden. Sumit may be right that the deal itself was legitimate while still being wrong about how he treated Jenny. The person who originally introduced Sumit to the opportunity becomes central to resolving the remaining questions. That individual explains that Sumit was approached because he could potentially contribute to one part of a broader expansion plan. Early numbers were speculative, and the 1.2 million figure represented what the overall operation might eventually become rather than guaranteed money. The person also confirms that discussions began months before the proposal looked serious, which explains why Jenny found older dates. For Sumit, that confirmation supports his claim that early conversations were too uncertain to treat like a real deal. Jenny hears the same information differently. If discussions were happening for months, then Sumit had months to tell her something was developing. She never needed the exact valuation, confidential names, or detailed terms. She only needed him to say, "I am exploring a potentially significant opportunity, and I will tell you more when I can." That single sentence might have prevented almost everything that followed. Sumit does not immediately admit that because he is still angry about the police report, but eventually he reaches a point where defending every choice becomes impossible. He tells Jenny that he can now see how the secrecy looked from her position. He still believes waiting was reasonable in the earliest stages, but he admits there was a point where the deal became serious enough that he should have told her. He says he kept waiting for a cleaner moment when the details would make sense, and that moment never arrived. That admission matters more to Jenny than Sumit expects. She does not suddenly forget the investigation or the months of uncertainty, but for the first time she feels Sumit is answering the emotional question instead of correcting her interpretation of the paperwork. He is finally saying that her expectation of transparency was not unreasonable. Jenny then has to make an admission of her own. She tells Sumit that once she saw the 1.2 million figure, fear took over far more quickly than she realized. Every strange detail looked like proof because she had already started imagining the worst. She admits she should have separated two different concerns more carefully, whether the business deal was actually improper and whether Sumit had violated her trust by keeping it secret. Those were not necessarily the same question, but in the heat of the confrontation, they became one. Sumit asks whether she regrets calling police. Jenny cannot give him the simple answer he wants. She regrets that the situation reached that point, and she regrets making assumptions about what the money represented, but she still believes she had the right to seek help once she became concerned that financial commitments might somehow affect her. Sumit does not like the answer, but it is more honest than pretending everything can now be reduced to one person being wrong. His parents also have to adjust their position. Sumit's mother remains deeply upset with Jenny because she believes the police report created unnecessary humiliation and risk. At the same time, she tells Sumit privately that he cannot expect Jenny to behave calmly after discovering information he deliberately withheld. She tells him that secrecy has consequences even when the secret itself is not criminal. That is probably the last thing Sumit expected to hear from his mother after she spent so much time defending him. His father goes further and tells both of them that the investigation exposed something they should have confronted long before money entered the picture. Sumit handles uncertainty by keeping information to himself until he feels ready, while Jenny handles uncertainty by pushing harder for answers until she feels secure. Those two habits are almost guaranteed to collide. The larger the stakes become, the more destructive the collision becomes. While their marriage is being dissected from every angle, investigators continue reviewing the final documents. The most serious fear surrounding the 1.2 million figure continues losing weight because the records consistently point toward a projected valuation rather than hidden personal wealth. Sumit's stake appears limited and connected to specific conditions that would only become relevant if the venture moved forward. Several projections were never guaranteed, and some of the numbers Jenny originally saw represented scenarios rather than completed transactions. That should be the moment everyone relaxes, but one small question still prevents investigators from closing the matter immediately. There are differences in how certain commitments were described across communications, and authorities want to verify that those differences were simply part of evolving negotiations rather than evidence that someone misunderstood what they were agreeing to. Sumit insists this is normal for a deal that changed over time, and the people involved generally support that explanation. Jenny watches the investigation shrink from something terrifying into something technical, and the emotional whiplash is enormous. Days earlier, she was wondering whether her husband had secretly become connected to more than $1 million. Now it appears the biggest mystery may simply have been a complicated proposal combined with terrible communication. Yet Jenny cannot completely laugh it off because Sumit's secrecy was real. The investigation may be narrowing, but the marriage problem is still sitting exactly where it began. Then Sumit asks Jenny a question she has been avoiding. If the investigation ends without serious findings, can she admit that she did not trust him enough? Jenny answers by asking him whether he can admit that he did not trust her enough to handle uncertainty. Sumit says those are different things. Jenny says they are not as different as he thinks. He kept the deal secret because he decided she did not need the information until he was ready. She called police because she decided his explanations were not enough to make her feel safe. Both actions were driven by a lack of trust in how the other person would handle uncertainty. That realization does not magically repair anything, but it changes how they speak to each other. Sumit stops spending every conversation proving that Jenny misunderstood the 1.2 million. Jenny stops treating every missing detail like evidence of a darker secret. For the first time, they begin discussing how the crisis developed rather than simply arguing over who caused it. The biggest unresolved issue is still the investigation. Sumit remains under review while authorities finish checking the remaining financial records and communications. No final finding has established the dramatic secret Jenny initially feared, and the information so far increasingly supports Sumit's claim that the seven-figure number represented projected business value rather than hidden personal wealth. However, until the remaining questions are resolved, Sumit cannot simply declare the entire situation finished. His parents are now pushing him to cooperate fully and get the matter closed instead of wasting energy blaming Jenny. His mother still wants Jenny to understand how serious the police report was, but she also tells Sumit that if he expects his marriage to survive, he cannot keep major decisions secret simply because he believes he will eventually have a better explanation. His father tells him that proving the deal was legitimate will only solve half the problem. Jenny reaches the same conclusion from the opposite direction. Even if Sumit is completely cleared, she knows she cannot keep using the investigation as proof that her original suspicions were correct. An investigation is not a conviction, and questions are not evidence of guilt. If the records ultimately support Sumit, Jenny will have to acknowledge that fear caused her to imagine something far more sinister than what was actually happening. Yet Sumit will also have to acknowledge that Jenny did not invent the secrecy. She may have misunderstood the money, but she did not misunderstand the fact that her husband chose not to tell her about a significant opportunity. That is the detail that refuses to disappear no matter how many documents are explained. And this is what makes the entire situation so much more complicated than a simple story about money. If Sumit had actually hidden 1.2 million, the conflict would be obvious. If Jenny had invented the whole concern from nothing, the conflict would also be obvious. Instead, both of them appear to be partly right and partly responsible for how badly everything escalated. Sumit was not sitting on a secret million-dollar fortune, but he was keeping a potentially important financial opportunity away from Jenny. Jenny may have misunderstood what the documents represented, but she only found herself reading incomplete paperwork because Sumit never gave her the full context voluntarily. The police investigation may ultimately reveal nothing criminal, yet the fact that it reached that stage shows how completely trust had already broken down. The irony is brutal because the business opportunity was supposedly about creating security. Sumit believed he was working towards something that could eventually improve their future, but before the deal produced anything meaningful, it created one of the biggest crises their marriage had faced. He wanted certainty before speaking. Jenny needed honesty before certainty. Neither understood how dangerous that difference could become until police were involved. As the final records are being reviewed, Jenny asks Sumit whether he would handle the situation differently if he could go back. Sumit initially says he would protect the confidential details more carefully, but Jenny tells him that is not what she means. She asks whether he would tell her that an opportunity existed before it became a crisis. This time Sumit says yes. Then he asks Jenny the same question. Would she call police again, knowing what she knows now? Jenny says she would still seek independent advice if she believed unknown financial commitments could affect her, but she would first separate her emotional fear from the financial facts and make sure she understood exactly what she was reporting. It is not a perfect apology, and Sumit's answer is not a perfect apology either, but it is probably the first honest compromise they have reached since the document appeared. The investigation remains the final shadow hanging over everything. Sumit wants his name cleared, his parents want the family drama to end, and Jenny wants confirmation that no hidden obligation is waiting to surface later. Investigators are still reviewing the timeline and the other participants, but the central 1.2 million mystery now looks very different from the way it appeared when Jenny first discovered it. The money was never the only secret, and that may be the biggest twist of all. The real secret was how much of Sumit's decision-making had been happening outside Jenny's awareness, and the real investigation inside their marriage is whether that trust can ever be rebuilt. Police can review documents, trace money, check communications, and eventually determine whether the business arrangement deserves any further action, but they cannot answer the question Jenny and Sumit are now facing. If Sumit is completely cleared, Jenny still has to decide whether she can trust a husband who believed hiding something this significant was protecting her. Sumit still has to decide whether he can trust a wife who responded to that secrecy by bringing authorities into their lives. His parents still have to decide whether Jenny crossed an unforgivable line or reacted to a situation their son helped create. And until the investigation is officially resolved, one uncomfortable possibility keeps everyone waiting. What if the remaining documents simply confirm Sumit's explanation and prove the 1.2 million deal was never what Jenny feared? Or what if investigators find one final connection that nobody has fully explained yet? Because right now, Sumit says the truth will clear his name. Jenny says the truth is exactly what she was asking for from the beginning, and his parents are caught between defending their son and admitting that his secrecy helped create the disaster. The police may eventually close the investigation. The 1.2 million may eventually make perfect sense. But after everything Jenny discovered, everything Sumit kept from her, and everything that happened once authorities became involved, the biggest question is no longer whether Sumit was hiding $1 million fortune. It is whether Jenny and Sumit still have enough trust left to survive finding out the truth. This entire storyline is a fictional dramatization created solely for entertainment and does not describe real arrests, police investigations, financial deals, or allegations involving Jenny or Sumit.